Michael Hartford's hand froze on the back door handle. The sound of labored breathing in snow was exactly like Sarah's final moments 3 years ago. The pharmacy bottle of heart pills rattled in his coat pocket as he stepped into the blizzard, each footfall crunching like the monitors that had flatlined in room 314. What he saw wasn't possible. A black German shepherd collapsed against his fence, golden eyes reflecting the porch light like Sarah's had when she'd whispered, "Don't let me die alone." The dog's belly, swollen with pregnancy, rose and fell in the same desperate rhythm Sarah's chest had made those last hours. Blood pooled crimson against pristine Christmas Eve snow. The same snow that had fallen the night Sarah passed, when he'd promised her he'd never care for another living thing again. His wedding ring clinked against the doorframe as violent trembling seized his arthritic hands. Why did every creature he might love come to him dying? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Michael Hartford had lived 65 winters in Millbrook, Colorado, but none had felt as endless as the 3 since Sarah's death. The 2-story Victorian on Elm Street that once echoed with her laughter now held only the hollow tick of the grandfather clock she'd inherited from her mother. Each morning, he still set out 2 coffee cups from habit, then poured the second one down the sink with the bitter taste of regret. He'd been Millbrook's large animal veterinarian for 40 years, delivering calves in midnight blizzards and mending broken wings with the same gentle hands that had held Sarah through 2 miscarriages and countless sleepless nights. But the day they lowered her casket into frozen ground, he'd locked his medical bag in the basement and sworn off healing anything that could break his heart again. The house showed signs of a man who'd stopped living while still breathing. Dust gathered on Sarah's reading glasses, left exactly where she'd placed them on the kitchen table. Her coffee mug remained in the dish rack, unwashed since December 23, 2021. The Christmas tree they'd bought together still stood in the corner, ornaments untouched, lights unplugged, a monument to the last moment they'd been happy. Sarah Elizabeth Hartford had been everything he wasn't. Where he was methodical and quiet, she was spontaneous and vibrant. She'd filled their childless home with rescued strays, injured birds, and the occasional orphaned deer. "Animals choose us when we need them most," she'd say, nursing another broken creature back to health. Michael had indulged her compassion, never understanding it until cancer stole her voice, then her strength, then finally her gentle spirit. Their neighbors whispered about the change in him. Dr. Jennifer Parks, his former colleague, left concerned voicemails he never returned. Tommy Chen, the 16-year-old next door, still delivered groceries twice a week, payment left on the counter without conversation. Even Father Murphy had given up his monthly visits after Michael made it clear that God's house held no comfort for a man who'd watched divine mercy fail so completely. The routine had become his prison. Coffee at dawn, newspaper crosswords, frozen dinners, and the nightly ritual of taking his heart medication while staring at Sarah's empty chair. He'd avoided the veterinary clinic entirely, driving the long way to town to avoid seeing Dr. Park's concerned face through the window. Christmas decorations throughout Millbrook mocked his grief. Families gathered, children laughed, and life continued its relentless march while he remained frozen in December 2021. The blizzard warning that morning had suited his mood perfectly. Let the world disappear under snow. Let everything stop the way his heart had stopped when Sarah drew her last breath. But now, staring at the dying dog in his backyard, Michael felt something crack inside his chest. The same protective instinct that had driven 40 years of healing. The same desperate need that had made him hold Sarah's hand until it went cold. Some promises, he realized, were meant to be broken. Michael's veterinary instincts overrode 3 years of deliberate numbness as he knelt beside the German shepherd. Her golden eyes tracked his movements with intelligence clouded by pain, and when he reached toward her, she didn't flinch. She leaned into his touch with desperate trust that made his throat constrict. "Easy, girl," he whispered, the words rusty from disuse. His hands, steady despite the trembling in his chest, moved over her body with practiced efficiency. What he found made bile rise in his throat. Cigarette burns dotted her ribs in deliberate patterns. Rope burns circled her neck like a necklace of cruelty. Old fractures had healed wrong, and fresh wounds spoke of recent systematic abuse. But it was her swollen belly that made him curse under his breath. She was pregnant, heavily so, and by the way she panted in the snow, labor wasn't far off. Michael scooped her into his arms, surprised by how light she felt. Malnutrition had stolen the muscle that should have supported her frame. She pressed her muzzle against his shoulder, and for one impossible moment he smelled Sarah's perfume in the winter air. Inside, he cleared Sarah's reading chair and lined it with old blankets, creating a makeshift bed. The dog settled immediately, as if she'd been waiting her entire life for this moment of safety. Michael retrieved his medical bag from the basement, the first time he'd touched it since Sarah's funeral, and began a proper examination under the kitchen lights. The extent of her injuries told a story of calculated cruelty that made his hands shake with rage. Someone had trained this beautiful, intelligent animal through systematic torture. Her ears perked at certain commands, suggesting police or military background, but her flinching at sudden movements revealed the trauma that had overwritten her training. "Who did this to you?" he asked, and she tilted her head as if trying to answer. That's when he noticed the collar. Leather, expensive, with a name tag so scratched he could barely make out the letters. B-E-L. Something. Bella, maybe? The blizzard howled against the windows as Michael set up an IV line, his muscle memory guiding hands that hadn't performed veterinary work in 3 years. The dog, Bella, watched him with those remarkable eyes, and he found himself talking to her the way he used to talk to Sarah during her treatments. "That's it. Breathe through it. I know it hurts, but we're going to get through this together." The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd failed to save his wife with all his medical knowledge, but maybe he could save this broken creature who'd appeared in his yard like an answer to a prayer he'd been too angry to speak. His scanner from the old clinic still worked, and when he ran it over Bella's shoulder, it beeped. A microchip. The readout made him freeze. Registered to R.R. Morrison, Millbrook Police Department. Ray Morrison. His neighbor. Michael knew him by reputation. A decorated detective, respected in the community, married to sweet Betty Morrison, who brought casseroles to grieving widowers and always asked about his health at the grocery store. The same Ray Morrison who'd expressed sympathy at Sarah's funeral and offered to check on the house when Michael traveled. The pieces didn't fit. Ray Morrison rescuing abused animals, not creating them, unless... Bella whimpered and shifted, her breathing changing rhythm. Michael had delivered enough animals to recognize the signs. Labor was beginning, and given her condition, it would be dangerous. He glanced at the phone, thinking of Dr. Parks, but the storm had knocked out the landlines and his cell showed no service. He was alone with a dying dog about to give birth, and the only person who might have answers was the man whose name was on her microchip, the same man who lived 3 houses down and drove past his window every morning at exactly 7:15. At 7:23 a.m., Bella delivered her first puppy with a strength that defied her battered condition. Michael guided the tiny life into the world, with hands that remembered every delivery from his 40-year career, tears streaming down his face as the newborn's first cry pierced the silence that had consumed his house for 3 years. The puppy was perfect, dark coat gleaming, lungs strong, already seeking warmth against her mother's belly. "Good girl, Bella. That's it. Breathe," he murmured, using Sarah's reading glasses to examine the puppy. The prescription was too strong for his eyes, but wearing them felt like having Sarah guide his hands through the miracle unfolding in their living room. The second puppy arrived at 8:15, smaller but equally healthy. Michael's heart, dormant for so long, hammered against his ribs as he cleared the newborn's airways and watched Bella's maternal instincts override her trauma. She cleaned each puppy with gentle precision, positioning them for nursing with the intelligence that had somehow survived her ordeal. That's when the knock came. 3 sharp raps on his front door, authoritative and impatient. Through the peephole, Michael saw Ray Morrison, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing his detective's badge and an expression of professional concern that didn't quite reach his cold blue eyes. "Dr. Hartford, Ray Morrison, Millbrook PD, mind if I come in? We're doing welfare checks after the storm." Michael's blood turned to ice water. Bella, hearing Morrison's voice, began trembling violently. Her pupils dilated with terror, and she tried to move her newborns away from the door, whimpering in a way that made Michael's stomach clench. The reaction was unmistakable. She knew that voice, feared it with every fiber of her being. "I'm fine, Detective." "Thank you for checking." Michael kept his voice steady, one hand gently stroking Bella's head to calm her shaking. "Protocol requires a visual confirmation, sir, especially for residents living alone. Won't take but a minute." Michael had no choice. Refusing would create suspicion, and Morrison had the authority to enter anyway. He cracked the door open, stepping outside onto the porch and pulling the door nearly closed behind him. Morrison was exactly as Michael remembered from community events, imposing at 6'2", with graying hair and weathered features that spoke of years on the force. But there was something different now, something predatory in the way his eyes scanned Michael's face and tried to peer past him into the house. "Rough night?" Morrison asked, noting Michael's exhausted appearance. "Heard you retired from veterinary work." "Must be strange being alone during storms like this." "I manage fine." Michael kept his body blocking the doorway, hyper-aware of every sound from inside. A puppy's cry would give everything away. "Course you do. Sarah was lucky to have you caring for her those last months. Cancer's a hell of a thing." Morrison's sympathy sounded rehearsed, mechanical. "Funny thing, though, we've had reports of missing pets in the area. Folks getting anxious about their animals. You haven't seen any strays, have you? Dogs, specifically?" The question hung in the frigid air like a blade. Michael forced himself to meet Morrison's stare, recognizing the interrogation technique, casual questions designed to elicit tells. Behind the door, he heard Bella's labored breathing as another contraction began. "Haven't seen any animals. I don't do that anymore." Morrison nodded slowly, but his eyes remained calculating. "Understandable. Losing someone changes a man's priorities. Still, if you did happen to see a stray, big dog, black, might be injured, important you call it in immediately. Could be dangerous. Rabies, you know." Another puppy cry, barely audible but unmistakable. Morrison's head tilted slightly, and Michael's heart stopped. The detective's expression shifted, became sharper, more focused. "Everything all right in there, Doc? Thought I heard something." "Just the television. Sometimes the weather affects the reception." Morrison stepped closer, and Michael caught a scent that made his stomach lurch. The same antiseptic smell he'd noticed on Bella's coat mixed with cigarette smoke. The kind of clinical smell that lingered after someone had spent time hurting something. "Mind if I use your bathroom? Coffee's going right through me." It wasn't a request. Morrison's hand rested casually on his service weapon, and his smile never reached those flat, emotionless eyes. Michael realized with crystalline clarity that this wasn't a welfare check, it was a hunting expedition. Morrison knew exactly what he was looking for. Of course, just through the kitchen. As Morrison stepped past him into the house, Michael caught the man's satisfied smile. Behind them, Bella's third puppy was being born into a world where the monster who'd tormented her mother stood just 20 feet away, separated only by a thin wooden door, and Michael's desperate need to protect the family he'd never expected to find. Morrison's boots echoed on Sarah's hardwood floors, each step a countdown to discovery. And Michael Hartford, who'd spent 3 years learning how to let things die, suddenly remembered why some things were worth fighting for, even if it killed him. Michael stood frozen in his hallway, listening to Ray Morrison's deliberate footsteps echo through the kitchen. Each bootfall seemed to last an eternity, and he could hear the detective pause at doorways, undoubtedly cataloging every detail of the house with trained eyes. From the living room came Bella's labored breathing as her third puppy fought its way into the world, and Michael prayed the sound wouldn't carry. "Nice place you got here, Doc," Morrison called out, his voice carrying false casualness. "Sarah always kept it so neat. Bet it feels different without her touch." The comment felt like a violation, Morrison's lips forming his wife's name. Michael clenched his fists, forcing himself to respond normally. "She had good taste." "That she did. Shame about the cancer." "Quick at the end, wasn't it?" Michael closed his eyes, remembering Sarah's final weeks, the way she'd grown so thin he could see every bone in her hands, how she'd made him promise to keep living after she was gone. A promise he'd broken until 20 minutes ago when Bella's first puppy drew breath. Morrison emerged from the kitchen, his cold eyes sweeping the living room entrance where Michael stood guard. "Bathroom's occupied at the moment. Mind if I wait a few minutes? Storm's got the roads pretty rough." It wasn't a question. Morrison settled into the same chair where Sarah used to read her mystery novels, and Michael had no choice but to join him in the living room, positioning himself carefully to block any view of Bella's makeshift birthing area behind the couch. "You know," Morrison said, pulling out a small notepad, "I've been working this missing pets case for months. Started with Mrs. Chen's poodle last spring, then the Williamses' retriever. Now we're up to 6 animals vanished without a trace." Michael's mouth went dry. 6? All purebreds, all valuable. Makes a man wonder if we're dealing with theft or something worse. Morrison's pen tapped against the notepad in a steady rhythm that matched Michael's racing heartbeat. "Thing is, these aren't random grabs. Someone with knowledge is selecting specific animals. Someone who understands breeding, genetics, market value." Behind the couch, Bella whimpered softly as another contraction seized her. Morrison's head tilted and Michael quickly coughed to cover the sound. "Sounds like you're getting sick, Doc. This weather's hard on folks our age." "Just dry air from the heater." Morrison nodded, but his eyes had sharpened with predatory focus. "Funny thing about that missing poodle, Mrs. Chen swears she saw it just last week, but different somehow. Thinner, skittish, like it had been broken." The word hung in the air like poison. Michael felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold seeping through the windows. Behind him he heard the wet sound of Bella cleaning her newborn, and he shifted his weight to better block Morrison's line of sight. "People see what they want to see when they're grieving," Michael managed. "True enough, but sometimes people see exactly what's happening, and they just don't want to believe it." Morrison leaned forward, his bulk casting a shadow across the coffee table where Sarah's reading glasses still lay. "Tell me, Doc, in your professional opinion, what kind of person hurts animals for pleasure?" The question was a trap, loaded with implications that made Michael's skin crawl. Morrison's eyes never left his face, watching for any tell, any crack in his composure. In the silence that followed, Michael could hear his own pulse thundering in his ears. "Someone damaged," he said finally. "Someone who's transferred their own pain onto innocent creatures." Transferred. Morrison rolled the word around like he was tasting it. "That's an interesting way to put it." Like maybe someone who lost something precious and can't figure out how to grieve properly. A chill ran down Michael's spine that had nothing to do with the storm. There was something personal in Morrison's tone, something that suggested he wasn't just talking about a theoretical perpetrator. "Detective, if you don't mind me asking, why come to me with this? I haven't practiced in 3 years." Morrison's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Because you're the only veterinarian in Millbrook who'd have the skills to keep stolen animals alive long enough to make them profitable. And because your grief makes you vulnerable to suggestion." The accusation hit like a physical blow. Michael's mouth opened and closed soundlessly as he processed what Morrison was implying, that he was somehow involved in the disappearances, that his isolation made him a suspect. "I think you should leave," Michael said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I think I should stay until I'm satisfied you're not hiding anything." Morrison's hand moved to rest on his service weapon. "See, here's what bothers me about your story, Doc. 3 years of refusing to touch animals, and suddenly you're coughing to cover up sounds from your living room, sounds that any man with 40 years of veterinary experience would recognize immediately." Behind the couch, Bella's 4th puppy was fighting to be born. Michael could hear her strain against the birthing process, and his heart broke for what she was enduring while her tormentor sat 15 feet away, playing psychological games. "Maybe those sounds are in your imagination," Michael said, but his voice cracked on the words. Morrison stood slowly, his height and bulk making the living room feel suddenly cramped. "Maybe, or maybe you've got something back there that belongs to me." The mask was coming off now. Morrison's professional demeanor dissolved, replaced by something cold and calculating that made Michael's blood freeze. This wasn't a cop investigating a crime. This was a predator hunting his prey. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do." Morrison stepped closer, and Michael caught that antiseptic smell again, stronger now. "You've got her, don't you? My beautiful broken bitch who thought she could run from me." The words were like a physical assault. Michael's vision went red around the edges as rage flooded through him. Rage for Bella's suffering, for the puppies being born into this nightmare, for the violation of his home and Sarah's memory. "Get out of my house," Morrison laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Or what? You'll call the police?" "I am the police, Doc. I've got a badge, a gun, and the authority to search this house if I suspect criminal activity." Behind them, Bella cried out as her 4th puppy finally emerged. The sound was unmistakable now, and Morrison's face transformed with savage satisfaction. "There she is, my prize breeding stock." He drew his weapon, not pointing it at Michael, but letting its presence speak for itself. "See, Doc? You've stumbled into something bigger than your grief-addled brain can comprehend. That animal represents months of investment, careful conditioning, genetic planning. She's carrying future generations of perfect specimens." Michael's world tilted on its axis. Morrison wasn't just abusing animals. He was running some kind of breeding operation, using his position as a police officer to steal and torture creatures for profit. "You're insane. I'm practical. Animals exist to serve human purposes. Some people just lack the stomach to do what's necessary to maximize their potential." Morrison's eyes held the flat, emotionless stare of a sociopath. "Your wife understood that, near the end. All that morphine made her very agreeable to suggestions about what should happen to her medical equipment after she passed." The implication hit Michael like a sledgehammer. Sarah's veterinary supplies, the ones he'd assumed were donated to charity, had somehow ended up in Morrison's hands. The detective had been planning this for years, using Sarah's death as an opportunity to acquire the tools he needed for his horrific enterprise. Sarah signed a lot of papers when the pain got bad. Amazing what people will agree to when they're desperate for relief. Morrison's smile was pure malice. She was very concerned about making sure her husband wouldn't be burdened with difficult decisions. Michael's knees nearly buckled. Morrison had manipulated his dying wife, used her love and concern against her to further his own twisted agenda. The violation was so complete, so monstrous, that Michael couldn't process it. "Now," Morrison continued, his voice returning to professional calm, "you're going to step aside and let me reclaim my property. This doesn't have to get messy." From behind the couch came the sound of newborn puppies crying for their mother, and Bella's exhausted panting as she tried to recover from the ordeal of bringing life into a world that had shown her nothing but cruelty. Michael looked at Morrison's weapon, then at the living room where his wife had spent her final months, where she'd made him promise to keep living, to keep caring. The choice crystallized with perfect clarity. "No." Morrison's eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. "I'm sorry?" "I said no." Michael stepped forward, putting himself directly between Morrison and the makeshift nursery. "You're not touching her. You're not touching those puppies. This ends here." For the first time since entering the house, Morrison looked uncertain. He'd expected compliance from a broken old man, not defiance from someone who'd found something worth protecting again. "Doc, you're making a serious mistake. The mistake was letting you in my house." Michael's voice grew stronger with each word. "The mistake was 3 years of letting things die instead of fighting for them. But that stops now." Morrison raised his weapon, and Michael Hartford, who'd spent 3 years learning how to give up, discovered he still remembered how to stand his ground. The living room became a frozen tableau, Morrison's service weapon trained on Michael's chest, while newborn puppies cried behind the couch where their mother fought to survive the trauma of giving birth under the gaze of her tormentor. Time stretched like elastic, each second containing eternities of possibility and terror. "You don't understand what you're protecting," Morrison said, his voice taking on the reasonable tone of someone explaining simple facts to a child. "That animal isn't some innocent victim. She's a killer, Doc. Trained to attack, bred for violence. I've been trying to break that conditioning for months." Michael's hands trembled, but he didn't move from his position, blocking access to Bella. "By torturing her? By teaching her proper submission? Dogs are pack animals. They need to understand hierarchy." Morrison's finger rested on the trigger, and Michael could see the calculation in his eyes. "She killed my son, Doc. 8 years old, torn apart by teeth designed for war. Everything I've done has been justice." The words hit Michael like physical blows, each one designed to justify the unjustifiable. Behind him, Bella whimpered as her 5th puppy began its struggle into the world, and he could hear the wet, desperate sounds of a mother trying to bring life into existence while death stood 20 feet away. "Your son," Michael said, pieces of a horrible puzzle beginning to form. "Timothy Morrison." Morrison's face twisted with grief and rage. "You remember the newspaper story? 8-year-old boy killed by aggressive dog during family camping trip? What the papers didn't print was how that dog waited until I was asleep, then attacked an innocent child for no reason." Michael had read that story, had grieved for a fellow father's loss, even while trying to process his own wife's approaching death. But something in Morrison's telling felt wrong, rehearsed, like a story told so many times the teller had begun to believe his own lies. "The dog was put down," Michael remembered. "I put her down." Morrison's voice cracked with the first genuine emotion he'd shown. "I held that monster while the vet injected the poison, and I watched her eyes go dark. But it wasn't enough. One dead dog doesn't balance the scales when my boy died screaming." The pieces clicked into place with horrible clarity. Morrison hadn't been investigating missing pets. He'd been taking them, using his position, his authority, his access to create a private torture chamber where he could exact revenge on every dog for the actions of one. "How many?" Michael asked, his voice barely a whisper. 17. Morrison said the number with sick pride. 17 lessons in submission. 17 examples of what happens to animals that forget their place in the natural order. Behind the couch, Bella cried out as her 5th puppy fought to be born. The sound seemed to trigger something in Morrison, whose face contorted with fresh rage. She was supposed to be number 18, perfect breeding stock, military trained, ideal for teaching the ultimate lesson in humility, but she had to run, had to make this complicated. Michael's medical training kicked in despite his terror. He could hear distress in Bella's breathing pattern, complications with the final birth. She needed immediate attention, but Morrison's weapon never wavered from his chest. "Let me help her," Michael said. "Whatever you think she did, those puppies are innocent." "Those puppies are abominations." Morrison stepped closer, and Michael caught the full force of that antiseptic smell. Industrial disinfectant mixed with something darker, more organic. Products of forced breeding with inferior stock. They'll be put down humanely, unlike their mother. The casual dismissal of life, not just Bella's, but 5 newborn creatures who'd committed no crime except being born, ignited something primal in Michael's chest. The same protective fury that had driven him through 40 years of healing, the same desperate love that had made him hold Sarah's hand until it went cold. "Over my dead body." Morrison's smile returned, colder than the storm outside. "That can be arranged. Old man, grief-stricken, attacks police officer during welfare check. Tragic but understandable. Loss makes people do crazy things." The scenario was perfect in its simplicity. Morrison had the authority, the weapon, the story that would satisfy any investigation. Who would question a decorated detective's account of defending himself against a mentally unstable widower? But as Morrison raised his weapon to firing position, the front door exploded inward. Officer Jake Santos burst through the entrance, weapon drawn, snow coating his uniform and panic etched across his young face. "Detective Morrison, thank God you're—" He stopped mid-sentence, taking in the scene, his superior officer pointing a gun at an unarmed elderly man, the sounds of distressed animals coming from behind the couch, the smell of blood and birth mixing with antiseptic. "Santos," Morrison said without lowering his weapon. "Perfect timing. Dr. Hartford here was just resisting arrest." Santos looked confused, his own weapon wavering between positions. "Arrest? For what?" "Animal abuse. Theft of police property. Obstruction of justice." Morrison's voice carried complete authority, the unshakable confidence of a superior officer. "The animal behind that couch belongs to the department. Hartford's been hiding evidence in an ongoing investigation." Michael saw his chance in Santos's uncertainty. "Officer, that dog has been tortured." "She's giving birth right now, and she's in distress. Your detective here just confessed to stealing and abusing 17 animals." "That's ridiculous," Morrison snapped, but Michael caught the slight tremor in his voice. "Hartford's mentally unstable. Grief has made him paranoid, delusional." Santos looked between them, his young face reflecting the impossible position he'd been placed in. Behind the couch, Bella's cries intensified, and the sound of newborn puppies filled the silence. "Sir," Santos said slowly, "maybe we should call for backup. Sort this out at the station." "No backup." Morrison's mask was slipping now, authority giving way to desperation. "This is a simple recovery operation. Help me secure the animal and we'll file the paperwork later." But Santos had caught the change in his superior's tone, the shift from professional confidence to something more frantic. His own weapon remained drawn but pointed at the floor, his training warring with instinct. "Detective, why don't you lower your weapon? Let me check on the animal's condition first." "The animal's condition is irrelevant," Morrison snarled. "It's evidence in a criminal case." Santos moved slowly toward the couch, and Michael saw his face change as he took in the sight. Bella, clearly pregnant and in labor, surrounded by medical supplies and evidence of careful professional care. Not the scene of abuse Morrison had described, but of rescue. "Jesus Christ," Santos whispered. "How long has she been like this?" "All night," Michael said. "She showed up dying in my yard. I've been trying to save her and her puppies." Santos holstered his weapon and knelt beside Bella, his hand gently stroking her head. She responded with trust, allowing him to examine her condition, a response that spoke volumes about the difference between healing touch and harmful intent. "Detective," Santos said, his voice carefully controlled, "this animal shows signs of systematic abuse. Old cigarette burns, rope marks, deliberately broken bones that healed wrong." Morrison's facade cracked completely. "Animals lie, Santos. They manipulate human emotions to avoid consequences for their actions." The words were so divorced from reality that Santos actually recoiled. "Sir, animals can't lie. They can't manipulate. They just survive." Behind them, Bella delivered her fifth puppy with a final, exhausted cry. The newborn was smaller than the others, struggling to breathe, and Michael's medical instincts overrode everything else. He dropped to his knees beside the makeshift birthing area, gently clearing the puppy's airways and rubbing circulation into its tiny limbs. Morrison watched this display of compassion with disgust that bordered on madness. "Look at him, Santos. 50 years of letting animals manipulate his emotions. First, his wife dies because he spent more time with sick cattle than finding her proper doctors. Now he's risking everything for a creature that would kill him without hesitation." The accusation about Sarah was the final straw. Michael looked up from the struggling puppy, his eyes blazing with 3 years of suppressed grief and rage. "Sarah died because cancer doesn't care how much you love someone. She died because sometimes good people suffer while monsters like you thrive." His voice rose with each word. "But she also died believing that love matters, that caring for innocent creatures makes us human instead of animals." Santos stood slowly, his hand moving to his radio. "I'm calling this in. All of it." Morrison's weapon swung toward the young officer. "I don't think so." And Michael Hartford, holding a newborn puppy against his chest while its mother watched with grateful eyes, realized that some lines, once crossed, can never be uncrossed. The gunshot shattered the winter silence like breaking glass. Officer Jake Santos dropped to his knees, clutching his shoulder as blood seeped between his fingers. His radio clattered across Sarah's hardwood floor, spinning toward the kitchen where it would do no good to anyone. Morrison stood over him, service weapon smoking, his face a mask of cold calculation that had replaced any pretense of sanity. "Stupid boy," Morrison said, his voice eerily calm. 23 years old and you think you understand justice." Michael cradled the struggling puppy against his chest, feeling its tiny heart racing against his palm. Around him, the other 4 newborns cried for their mother, who lay panting in exhaustion and terror. The metallic smell of gunpowder mixed with the organic sense of birth and blood, creating an atmosphere of violence that seemed to poison the very air. Santos pressed his good hand against his wound, his young face pale with shock and pain. "Detective, you shot me. You shot your own partner." "I eliminated a threat to ongoing operations." Morrison's response was mechanical, devoid of emotion. "You were compromised by civilian manipulation tactics." The words chilled Michael more than the storm outside. Morrison had crossed from corrupt cop to something far more dangerous. A man who'd convinced himself that his crimes were justice, his victims deserving of their fate. The careful construction of his double life was crumbling, and he was willing to kill anyone who threatened to expose it. "Jake," Michael said softly, catching the young officer's attention. "Your radio, can you reach it?" Santos tried to crawl toward the device, but Morrison's boot came down hard on his wounded shoulder. The officer's scream of agony filled the room, and Bella whimpered in response, her maternal instincts torn between protecting her babies and fleeing the violence. "Nobody's calling anyone," Morrison said. "This storm's going to last another 12 hours, plenty of time to clean up this mess and create a proper narrative." Michael's mind raced through possibilities, each one ending in disaster. Morrison had complete control of the situation, weapon, authority, and the kind of desperate fury that made him unpredictable. The nearest neighbor was Tommy Chen's family, too far away to hear gunshots over the howling wind. "What narrative?" Michael asked, trying to buy time while the smallest puppy struggled for each breath. "Tragic home invasion during the blizzard. Unknown assailants killed elderly widower and responding officer, stole valuable breeding animals." Morrison's smile was a grotesque parody of human emotion. "I'll be the heroic detective who arrived too late, found the bodies, traced the criminals through careful investigation." The casual way Morrison planned their murders, the bureaucratic language he used to describe ending human lives, revealed the depth of his psychological break. This wasn't a moment of passion or desperation. It was the calculated decision of someone who'd been planning contingencies for months. Santos was losing blood fast, his breathing becoming shallow and rapid. Michael recognized the signs of shock setting in, knew the young officer needed immediate medical attention or he'd die on Sarah's living room floor. The irony was devastating. Surrounded by medical equipment and 40 years of healing knowledge, but helpless to save anyone while Morrison held them at gunpoint. "Why?" Michael asked, partly to keep Morrison talking, partly because he genuinely couldn't understand how a human being could transform into something so monstrous. "Why torture innocent animals? Why destroy lives over something that happened 8 years ago?" Morrison's face contorted with fresh grief, the mask slipping to reveal the broken father underneath the monster. "You want to know why? Because Timothy didn't die quickly. Because I found him 3 hours after that dog attacked, still alive, calling for his daddy while his life bled out in the dirt." The words hit Michael like physical blows, each one revealing new layers of trauma and guilt. Morrison wasn't just grieving his son's death. He was carrying the unbearable weight of failing to protect him, of being drunk and unconscious while Timothy suffered alone. "But punishing other animals won't bring him back," Michael said gently, recognizing the therapeutic approach that might reach whatever humanity remained in Morrison's shattered psyche. "It brings me peace." Morrison's voice cracked on the admission. "Every time I break one of those creatures, every time I watch the light die in their eyes, I see justice. I see Timothy getting the revenge he deserved." Behind them, Bella gathered her strength and rose on unsteady legs. Her 5 puppies cried out as she moved away from them, but she placed herself between Morrison and her babies with the kind of protective courage that defined motherhood across all species. Despite everything Morrison had done to her, despite months of torture and abuse, she was preparing to fight for her children. Morrison saw her movement and laughed, a sound devoid of humor or warmth. "Look at that. Still thinks she can win. Still believes in fairy tale endings." He raised his weapon toward Bella, and Michael realized with crystalline clarity that he was about to watch another innocent creature die while he stood helpless. The same powerlessness he'd felt watching Sarah slip away, the same crushing weight of being unable to save what mattered most. But this time, he wasn't alone. This time, he had something worth fighting for. And this time, Officer Jake Santos, bleeding and broken on the floor, managed to reach his backup weapon with his good hand. The second gunshot was even louder than the first. Detective Ray Morrison crumpled to the floor, Santos's backup weapon smoking in the young officer's trembling hand. The bullet had caught Morrison in the chest, and he lay gasping like a landed fish, his service weapon spinning away across Sarah's hardwood floors. Blood spread beneath him in an expanding pool that reflected the overhead lights like a crimson mirror. Michael rushed to Santos first, pressing kitchen towels against the shoulder wound while the officer struggled to maintain consciousness. "Stay with me, Jake. Help's coming." "Radio," Santos whispered through gritted teeth. "Called. Back up. Before I came in. Storm delayed. But they're coming." Morrison tried to speak, blood frothing at his lips, but his words came out as unintelligible whispers. His eyes still holding that flat, predatory stare, fixed on Bella with undiminished hatred, even as his life ebbed away. The German shepherd stood over her puppies, no longer cowering but alert and protective, as if she understood that the monster who'd tormented her was finally powerless. "How long ago?" Michael asked, checking Santos's pulse while applying pressure to the wound. 20 minutes. Roads are clearing." Santos's voice grew weaker with each word. "Told them officer down, domestic situation." Michael's medical training took over, the muscle memory of 40 years guiding his hands as he worked to stabilize the young officer. The irony wasn't lost on him, 3 years of refusing to heal anything, and now he was fighting to save 2 lives while Morrison bled out 15 feet away. Morrison's breathing became more labored, his eyes losing focus, but somehow, with his final reserves of strength, he managed to speak clearly enough to be understood. "Timothy," he gasped. "Timothy, I'm sorry." The words hung in the air like a confession, and Michael saw something shift in Morrison's face, the predatory mask finally slipping away to reveal a broken father who'd lost himself in grief and guilt. For a moment the monster became human again, and Michael felt an unwelcome stab of pity for the man who'd destroyed so many lives while trying to resurrect one. "The truth," Michael said, kneeling beside Morrison. "Tell me what really happened to Timothy." Morrison's eyes found Michael's, and for the first time since entering the house, they held something other than coldness. Wasn't the dog's fault." The admission came out in a whisper barely audible above the storm outside. Morrison's hand moved weakly toward his chest pocket, and Michael carefully retrieved what he was reaching for. A small photograph of a smiling 8-year-old boy with Morrison's eyes and his mother's gentle smile. "Camping trip," Morrison continued, each word a struggle. "I was drunk, passed out. Timothy fell into the ravine. Dog tried to save him, stayed with him for hours. When I found them, Dog was keeping him warm, licking his wounds." Michael felt his throat constrict as the real story emerged. The dog Morrison had killed hadn't been Timothy's attacker. It had been his protector, staying with the injured boy through the night, trying desperately to keep him alive until help arrived. "I killed the wrong one," Morrison whispered, tears mixing with blood on his cheeks. "Killed the hero. Let them all believe. Let Betty believe. Couldn't face the truth. That I killed my own son through neglect." Behind them, Bella approached slowly, her puppies crying for her attention. But instead of returning to them immediately, she sniffed at Morrison's outstretched hand, the same hand that had tortured her for months. Michael held his breath, wondering if she would show mercy to the man who'd shown her none. Bella's response was heartbreaking in its simplicity. She licked Morrison's fingers once, gently, then returned to her babies. No revenge, no violence, just the recognition of another broken creature seeking forgiveness in his final moments. Morrison's eyes widened at the gesture and fresh tears streamed down his face. She forgives me. After everything, she forgives me. Animals don't hold grudges, Michael said softly. They just survive and try to trust again. Morrison nodded weakly, his breathing becoming more shallow. The others, 17 others, basement of the old Hanson farm, barn in the back. Some might still be alive. The confession hit Michael like a physical blow. 17 other animals, possibly still suffering in whatever hellish facility Morrison had created. The scope of the cruelty was staggering, but at least now there was hope for the survivors. "Why tell me this?" Michael asked. "Because Timothy loved animals." "Would have hated what I became." Morrison's voice was barely a whisper now. "Tell Betty. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her Timothy was a good boy who deserved better than me." Morrison's eyes closed and his breathing stopped with a final, rattling exhale. The monster who'd terrorized Millbrook's animals for months was gone, leaving behind only questions about how grief could transform love into hatred, protection into destruction. Michael closed Morrison's eyes, then returned his attention to Santos, whose condition was stabilizing but still critical. In the distance, he could hear the faint sound of sirens cutting through the storm, backup finally arriving to a scene they could never have imagined. Bella had returned to her puppies, all 5 of them nursing contentedly despite the violence that had erupted around them. The smallest one, the fighter who'd struggled so hard to breathe, was now nursing vigorously alongside his siblings. Life persisting despite death, innocence surviving in the presence of evil. The front door burst open again, this time admitting a team of paramedics and police officers who stopped short at the scene before them. Dr. Jennifer Parks followed closely behind, her medical bag in hand and her face etched with concern. "Michael," she called out, rushing to his side. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine. But Jake needs immediate attention and Morrison's gone." Michael gestured toward the detective's body. "Jen, there's something else." Morrison confessed to a larger operation. 17 animals held at the old Hanson farm. Dr. Parks quickly examined Santos while other officers secured the scene and called for additional medical support. "The puppies?" "All 5 survived. Bella's a fighter." Michael looked down at the German shepherd, who watched the newcomers with cautious but not fearful eyes. "She's been through hell, but she's going to be okay." As the paramedics worked on Santos and crime scene investigators began photographing Morrison's body, Michael found himself sitting beside Bella and her puppies. The chaos of the last few hours seemed distant now, replaced by the simple miracle of new life and second chances. "Dr. Hartford," one of the investigators called out, "we're going to need a detailed statement." "Of course." Michael rose slowly, his body feeling every one of his 65 years. "But first, can someone contact the sheriff's department about the Hanson farm? There might be animals there that need immediate rescue." As official business took over his living room, Michael realized that Morrison's death wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. The beginning of justice for his victims, healing for the survivors, and perhaps most importantly, a chance for Michael himself to remember what it meant to fight for something worth saving. The storm outside was finally beginning to break, and through the kitchen window he could see the first hints of dawn touching the horizon. 6 months later, Michael Hartford stood in his backyard watching Bella teach her 5 puppies how to play in the spring sunshine. The German shepherd had filled out beautifully since that terrible December night, her coat glossy black with health, her golden eyes bright with contentment rather than fear. The puppies, Hope, Joy, Grace, Faith, and Love, named after Sarah's favorite virtues, tumbled over each other in the grass where snow had once been stained with blood. The transformation hadn't been immediate or easy. Those first weeks after Morrison's death had brought a parade of investigators, reporters, and animal welfare officials through Michael's home. The discovery at the Hanson farm had made national news. 12 animals found alive in conditions so horrific that several veteran officers had required counseling. 5 others hadn't survived Morrison's twisted version of justice, their bodies providing evidence that ensured his crimes wouldn't be minimized or forgotten. Jake Santos had recovered fully from his shoulder wound and received a commendation for his bravery. He visited regularly, bringing dog treats and updates on the ongoing investigation into Morrison's activities. Betty Morrison had moved away from Millbrook, but not before donating her husband's substantial pension to the newly established Timothy Morrison Memorial Fund for Animal Rescue, a foundation that ensured some good would come from the family's tragedy. Michael had testified at the posthumous hearing that stripped Morrison of his honors and recommended changes to police oversight procedures. The young prosecutor had asked him to describe Bella's condition when he found her, and Michael's voice had broken as he recounted the systematic cruelty she'd endured. But he'd also spoken about her capacity for forgiveness, her gentle nature despite everything she'd suffered, and the way she'd chosen to trust again despite having every reason to fear. The media attention had been overwhelming at first, but it had also brought something unexpected. Volunteers, people from across Colorado and beyond, had contacted Michael, offering to help with animal rescue efforts. Dr. Parks had become his full partner in converting his property into the Sarah Hartford Memorial Animal Sanctuary, licensed to house up to 20 rescued animals in specially designed facilities that prioritized healing and rehabilitation. Tommy Chen, now 17, spent his afternoons after school helping with the animals. He'd developed a special bond with Grace, the smallest of Bella's puppies, who'd grown into a remarkably intelligent dog with an intuitive understanding of human emotions. The teenager was planning to study veterinary medicine, inspired by watching Michael bring broken creatures back to life through patience and love. "Dr. Hartford," Tommy called from the barn they'd converted into a medical facility. "Luna's doing much better today." She actually wagged her tail when I brought her breakfast. Luna was a 3-year-old golden retriever who'd been one of Morrison's victims, so traumatized she hadn't made eye contact with humans for the first month of her recovery. Now she was beginning to trust again, largely thanks to Bella's example. The German Shepherd had become an unofficial therapy dog for other rescued animals, showing them through her own calm confidence that not all humans were monsters. Michael smiled, remembering how he'd once thought his healing days were behind him. Sarah's death had convinced him that loving anything meant risking unbearable loss, that the only safety lay in emotional isolation. But Bella had taught him that the alternative, a life without love, without purpose, without the risk of caring, wasn't really living at all. "Coming, Tommy," Michael called back, but he took a moment longer to watch Bella with her children. She'd proven to be an exceptional mother, protective but not overprotective, teaching them confidence while keeping them safe. 3 of the puppies had been adopted by carefully screened families, but hope and love had remained at the sanctuary, following their mother's example in helping other traumatized animals heal. Inside the barn, Luna lifted her head as Michael approached, her tail giving a tentative wag. The gesture might seem small to an outsider, but Michael recognized it as a miracle. Proof that trust could be rebuilt even after the worst betrayals, that love could survive despite evidence that the world was cruel and dangerous. "Good girl, Luna," he said softly, offering his hand for her to sniff. She approached slowly, allowing him to stroke her golden fur. "You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you again." The words had become a daily ritual, spoken to each animal in their care. Some believed him immediately, desperate for kindness. Others took weeks or months to accept that safety was possible. But they all eventually learned what Bella had taught him, that healing happens not despite the presence of love, but because of it. Dr. Parks emerged from the main facility, her hands covered in mud from treating a horse that had been rescued from a neglect case in Denver. "Michael, there's someone here to see you. Says she drove up from New Mexico." The visitor was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of a lifetime working with animals. She introduced herself as Maria Santos, Jake's aunt, and explained that she ran a ranch for retired police and military dogs. "I heard about what you've done here," she said, watching Bella demonstrate perfect recall commands to her puppies. "About how that beautiful girl survived what she went through and learned to trust again. I have dogs on my ranch who've seen combat, who've been through trauma. I was wondering if you might consider a partnership, sharing techniques, maybe having Bella visit to show them that healing is possible." Michael looked at Bella, who seemed to understand the conversation's importance. She approached Maria with cautious but open body language, allowing the stranger to pet her while keeping one eye on her puppies. The gesture spoke volumes about how far she'd come from the broken creature who'd collapsed in his yard 6 months ago. "I think Bella would like that," Michael said. "We're all still learning how to heal, but we're learning together." As the spring evening settled over the sanctuary, Michael reflected on the strange journey that had brought him here. Sarah's death had nearly destroyed him. Morrison's cruelty had tested his faith in humanity, and his own grief had convinced him that isolation was safer than love. But 5 puppies playing in the grass, a golden retriever learning to trust again, and a German shepherd who'd chosen forgiveness over revenge had taught him the most important lesson of his 65 years. Some things are worth the risk of loving, and healing others is often the only way to heal yourself. In the distance, church bells rang the evening hour, and for the first time since Sarah's death, Michael Hartford smiled at the sound. Sometimes life breaks us so completely that we convince ourselves we're safer staying broken. Michael Hartford learned this lesson at 65, when grief over his wife's death made him retreat from everything that once brought meaning to his world. For 3 years, he existed rather than lived, believing that loving anything meant risking unbearable loss again. Then a brutalized German shepherd named Bella collapsed in his snowy backyard, carrying 5 unborn puppies and a lifetime of trauma that mirrored his own emotional wounds. What happened next proves that healing doesn't happen despite our scars. It happens because of them. Michael discovered that his greatest loss had prepared him for his most important purpose, creating sanctuary for other broken souls who needed to learn that trust was still possible. Bella taught him that the alternative to risking love isn't safety. It's simply a slower kind of dying. Today, the Sarah Hartford Memorial Animal Sanctuary stands as proof that our deepest pain can become our greatest gift to others, that choosing to care again isn't just about healing ourselves, but about becoming healers for a world that desperately needs more love, not less. What loss in your life eventually led to unexpected purpose or meaning? Have you ever found healing by helping others who faced similar struggles? Share your story. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.